Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll start the presentation about 1 minute. We're waiting for people to get in and get settled. Everyone, just to let you know, we'll start the presentation in about 30 seconds. We're still waiting for people to get in and get settled. Thank you so much for joining us. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Safety Health Magazine webcast, The Cost of Doing Nothing, sponsored by KPA. This is Alan Ferguson, Associate Editor at Safety Health Magazine. I'm moderating today's event. Thank you so much for joining us, and before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items. As a disclaimer, the views of today's speakers and organization are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the National Safety Council or Safety and Health Magazine. Any mention of a commercial enterprise, product, or publication does not mean the council or the magazine endorses those items. After today's presentation, we'll conduct a question and answer session with our speaker. If you have a question, click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type your question, and press the send button. We welcome your questions at any time during today's event. You don't have to wait for the Q&A to begin. We might not get to every question, but the good news is unanswered questions will be forwarded to today's sponsor. Also, after this presentation, you'll be asked to complete a brief evaluation survey, and I'll tell you more about that a little bit later. This webcast will be archived so you can access it after today's live event. To view this webcast and all of our past webcasts, please visit safetyandhealthmagazine.com/events, or you may also receive a link in our post-event email. With that, let's introduce our speakers. With us today are Jade Brainerd and Darren Boyd. Jade is the product director for KPA's EHS software solutions and has been with the organization for 14 plus years, focusing on providing customers with turnkey safety management software solutions. Jade works with many kinds of organizations, including construction, energy, manufacturing, and insurance, to understand how technology can be leveraged to effectively manage safety, reduce risk, and keep companies compliant with an ever-evolving regulatory environment. Darren is the Senior Vice President for New Markets at KPA, leading the company's growth strategy and expansion into new industries. He also oversees the direction of KPA's EHS software with a focus on innovative new feature development based on client input and market demands. Before joining KPA, Darren co-founded iScout, a health and safety-focused software system. And before iScout, he was the Vice President for Safety and Compliance for Oklahoma City-based Crescent Services, LLC. Again, we thank you all for tuning into this presentation. Darren, whenever you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
Very good. Thanks, Alan. And by the way, you've got a fantastic voice for radio. So I've got a face made for radio. Hopefully my voice will hold off okay here. Well, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're at here today. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to share some insights a little bit on the topic of what is the cost of doing nothing. And really nothing earth-shattering, I don't think we're going to talk about today. Hopefully there is some nice perspective, some good information, and encouraging the group just on kind of move forward opportunities for continuous improvement. But kind of breaking the agenda down, we're going to talk about really what does it mean to do nothing. We're going to talk about the cost of doing nothing, and then of course the ROI on safety programs, and then just this idea of continuous improvement, that really we're all somewhere on this spectrum of a safety, growth journey within our organizations, and certainly opportunity for all of us to improve. Not any particular group ever truly arrives. There's always an opportunity to be better tomorrow than we are today, and we're going to have an opportunity to talk about that here in a little bit. So even just kind of moving on here, the idea of, what would in a perfect world, if we could just map out the world is right, what does a workplace environment look like from a health and safety perspective? Well, first and foremost, the easy answer is nobody gets hurt. We're incident free. We can do our tasks, complete the job, go home safely, and there's no fear or potential risk of somebody getting hurt. That would be pretty awesome. Assets, those tend to get in the way at times, but if those were indestructible and damage was just not something that occurred, that would be a perfect world scenario. State-of-the-art resources are just readily available, whether that's personal protective equipment, safety equipment, just the various resources that we need to do our jobs. If those were walk up to a machine and pull a lever and here's what I get, and I need it whenever I need it. So just that being available. Contractors, clients, always complying by the rules. Our employees are on time, trustworthy, and always fit for duty. And managers 100% of the time make the right decision. That would be euphoria, I think, for all of us. But looking at what we deal with, what's the reality of the workplace? So my wife and I, once upon a time, this goes back to, the spring of the year 2000, when the first Survivor season came out. There's actually been 43 of these since then, which is a little bit wild. But this quote always comes to mind to me a little bit. Mark Burnett, the producer of the Survivor series, among many other reality TV shows, his quote regarding Survivor was, "Nothing will ever be perfect and nothing can be totally planned." And that was really like the genesis. Like, there was a few reality shows out there, but this was like really the explosion of reality TV, and just how will people respond when there's no script? And really we all kind of learned some of the best TV is unscripted. But what's interesting at the same time is unscripted is like incredibly organized. The planning and the process for a show takes an entire crew, and they actually are doing a lot of scripting to put the contestants in a position for them just to respond accordingly. But this quote, nothing can ever be perfect and nothing can ever be totally planned. The truth of it is, I think we can describe perfect. We kind of just did that on the slide before. So we know what perfect looks like, and how do we plan for that? Maybe we can't achieve 100% of the time, but how close can we get to that? So just kind of framing this out just a little bit as we move along here. So doing nothing. I think, the title of this session is The Cost of Doing Nothing. Let's break down what is doing nothing. What exactly does that mean? So there's probably, we could sit here and spend the whole rest of the session just talking about what nothing could potentially mean. Here's a handful of just some low-hanging, fruit that we thought would be relevant right off the bat across the board. No formal training or task competency, kind of a they'll figure it out attitude. That's literally nothing in place for that. Void of leadership. When positive leadership doesn't exist, the hole's going to get filled in by something or someone. So when nothing is from a leadership perspective, and I think all of these, really, an indecision is a decision, inaction is an action. And so just because something's not being done in these categories, I think for the most part across the board, there's going to be a replacement. There's going to be a substitute that fills in. And oftentimes it's not what is the most desired thing. Reactive planning, this certainly cripples our ability to mitigate or eliminate hazards. It really can set a project off the rails. We're just unprepared for today's work. And doing nothing certainly is planning focused when that doesn't happen. Ignoring lessons learned, just not paying attention to the past, learning from that, and being better moving forward. Unaware of worker acts and or conditions. Don't quote me on this one, but I have read someplace somewhere that 98% of unwanted events that take place kind of stem from unsafe acts, unsafe conditions. A lot of times at the human side of things coming into play. So just being aware of, those acts or conditions, or being oblivious to it. I think there's really kind of two sides. It's either you truly are oblivious or you just don't care. And in both cases, that's kind of a do nothing mentality. A shoulder shrug attitude, kind of an, oh, well, it is what it is. It's one of my least favorite sayings, but, that attitude is a do nothing approach to workplace safety. And then lack of communication or feedback. When communication breaks down, does not take place, there's a lot of problems that can happen. It's just unknown as we get into certain situations. And then feedback as well. There's a quote there at the bottom of the page that nothing is more damaging to a safety culture than the sound of crickets. If we're fostering a workplace where we want feedback and information, we want this open channel of communication to answer questions, to address issues, and somebody actually does that, if they take us up on it and they're going to say, hey, I've got a question, or I'm going to raise my hand with an issue, and there's nothing back in response to them, I don't know if there's anything more damaging to a safety culture than nothing. So that's just kind of a frame out. Again, we could spend, much more time just kind of adding to this list. But just a few of them, again, to kind of frame out what that potential do nothing is. So why some do nothing? Kind of problems. It kind of maybe goes back to the shoulder shrug mentality a little bit, but oftentimes, and we see this as we try to introduce new safety initiatives, I think sometimes technology, you put both of those two things together and there just tends to be pushback. And these are some of the reasons why we might hear the workforce, the operations team, push back on just not doing something. And that the first one is it's going to slow us down. When groups are very job focused, I think they're tunnel visioned at times to get the job done. I think that's a great characteristic to have, but there are things we need to make sure we're incorporating into getting it done. So focused on the job, anxious to meet a deadline, eager to complete it and just go home. I think there's some impatience in there at times, but this idea of don't give me one more piece of paper to fill out because I'm busy doing the job. Doing something is going to cost. There's budgetary constraints. Maybe they're unaware of the actual return on an investment that they'll see by doing something. So the rationale of not doing anything being a financial related or just unaware of the consequences and the cost that unplanned events really have on us. And Jade's going to kind of go into that here in just a little bit. And then we don't believe anything bad will happen. I'll just keep it on this slide. This is perfect, but nothing bad will happen. I think there's an attitude of, I've always done it this way. I'm good. They don't really recognize the act as unsafe. I think there is kind of this macho, too cool attitude at times as well. And what is interesting, quick comment, is just like, I think a near miss, kind of the fruit produced from a near miss event to the actual affected person is incredible with their approach and mentality to that event moving forward. And so unless you've had that experience, sometimes it's just as easy to do nothing and have no change. So this slide here is to combat that theory a little bit. This may be new for some. Some may have heard this before, but in 1853 at the World's Fair, it was in New York City. At the palace was this Crystal Palace was this new facility that they had built. There was an inventor by the name of Elisha Otis. If you have ridden on an elevator, probably anywhere in the country, maybe even your own office buildings, you might look, and Otis is probably the brand that you're going to see inside of the elevator. But prior to 1953, when you looked at real estate across the country, you didn't see many buildings beyond 4 or 5 stories. It was just rare. And there was reasons for that. One, people didn't want to climb, the stairs to get up to the upper floors, and they were terrified if it had an elevator. They were terrified to ride it because they felt it was unsafe. So at that time, the most expensive real estate were the bottom floors, and the cheapest, you can get a deal on the penthouse. 1953 in the exhibit hall, Elisha Otis essentially had, you can kind of see in this picture, there's a person on the very top that cuts a rope. The elevator brake enables itself, and he stops about an inch below the fall and just says the term, all is safe. And that one small little feature, the comfort and confidence with a safety device that worked, created this explosion in the real estate market and in cities across the country. In 1953, there were only a few buildings that were 5 stories or taller. By 1890, there were 10 buildings taller than 10 stories. 1990, there's 65 buildings. 1908, there's 538 buildings that would be considered skyscrapers. And that real estate flipped upside down. The most expensive became the top, and you could get deals cut on the lower floors. So when you look at something is going to slow us down, or the cost of doing something, when done right and the right element put into place, there can be an explosion of growth, an explosion of operational efficiency, an explosion of dollars that can be earned, just by that confidence level being put into place. No different than the Golden Gate Bridge. When they were running behind, ended up putting a netting system in. The confidence gave their workers the ability to move forward and catch up on their timeline. So a little bit of a misconception to that, but I love this story and have shared it several times, but just wanted to include that on today's call. So now we're going to shift here just a little bit, and I've kind of honed in on doing nothing and just kind of framing that out a little bit. Now we get into the good analytic stuff, the more intelligent, and that's where Jade's going to come into play. So I'll pass it on over.
Well, thanks, Darren. I don't know about good. Maybe boring is the better word, but it's key to our conversation today, and that's evaluating the cost. And for what it's worth, I would definitely say you have a voice for radio. I know I would tune in, especially hearing stories like that with the elevator bill. OSHA. It's very interesting. So yeah, let's jump into what does doing nothing cost, because there is a cost to it. That is another misconception that doing nothing doesn't require a budget. There is certainly something to that. So there's 5 items that we're going to talk through today, and how it will impact that overall cost, and that's time and productivity lost, regulatory fines that will be more at risk, and we'll talk about some changes coming in the regulatory landscape, accident expenses, and we'll look at some examples of cost avoidance and how if these accidents take place, what truly is that going to cost your business, insurance premiums, how that's impacted as a result of those accidents, and then overall company reputation. And that's a little bit harder to quantify the overall cost, but obviously has a big impact on corporate expense and profitability. So starting with time and productivity loss. So time is money. This is a good place to start, because not doing anything requires that there's manual processes and reactive processes in place. So it is going to have and those are inefficient and time-consuming processes. So whether that's using Excel spreadsheets or filling information out on paper, duplication between capturing information in the field versus back in the office, and then completing information on separate reports and things like that. Having disconnected teams, lack of communication, and streamlining that information, and then just lack of overall data and visibility. So not having a system in place or investing in a program really attributes to a missed opportunity to really see below the surface of what's going on and target those key areas. There's been lots of surveys done about time and productivity loss, but one survey conducted by West Monroe shows that an average manager, safety manager, spends up to half their work week on administrative tasks. I don't know if that resonates with any of you. I know with a lot of our customers that use our EHS software solution, one of the biggest points that they used with convincing leadership to invest into EHS software systems was that time savings and man-hour savings. So instead of focusing on big issues, EHS directors are forced to just waste time transferring data between spreadsheets, tracking down different documents, compiling reports. That effort is then duplicated, possibly, back in the office staff trying to compile that information, then have workarounds to make up for a lack of system availability. And then that key point of really missed opportunity with that lack of data and visibility. What more could you be doing if you were able to implement more effective, efficient processes, capture data one time, and then be able to visualize, where the key points of major loss are occurring, where you should be focusing your safety efforts. What more could you be doing if you could eliminate some of that administrative burden? So time and productivity loss, that, as it pencils out in paper, is going to look different for every organization, depending on, the size of your teams, the size of how many locations you have, and your current processes that you put into place, and the efficiencies that could be gained. But, goes without saying that this is a key important item to evaluating the total cost of doing nothing. We'll take a look next at regulatory fines. So, whereas regulatory fines may not seem like a big number when it comes to individual citations, that can and will change. So if you're not already aware, OSHA's making some adjustments to policy that is starting March 25th this year. And the policy change will allow citations for each instance of a violation, rather than combining these into, kind of grouped together into under a single citation. So previous enforcement policy allowed for like several serious or other than serious violations to be grouped together. Now these will be counted as individual citations. So currently there's on the green box there, maximum penalty amounts by violation type. So willful or repeat violations, $145,027, serious $14,502, and other than serious $14,000. So, calculating the cost of just cost avoidance of some of these top 10 most frequently cited citations. So if you're not familiar with this visual here, there's a link and we'll share the slides following this, but every year OSHA distributes for the previous year, what are the top 10 most frequently cited violations. And these rarely change too much, maybe a little bit of the order of the top citations, but for the most part, they're all on the top 10 year over year. So citations related to fall protection, respiratory protection, ladders, hazard communication, scaffolding, fall protection training, control of hazardous energy, lockout, tagout, eye and face protection, powered industrial trucks, machinery, and machine guarding. So those were the top 10 that were announced last year. And do any of these resonate with your business in areas of potential exposure? So starting this year, for each individual citation, either willful, repeat, or serious, those could be the potential fines. So that's just another area to consider as we look at the total cost of doing nothing. Is what are you exposing your business to as it relates to regulatory citations and fines? And we can't talk about the cost of doing nothing or the cost of lack of implementing processes and safety programs without talking about TCOR, total cost of risk. And that comes down to our accident expenses. So heaven forbid something does happen, we have an injury for our workforce. What does that cost of that risk look like? And this is, as Darren mentioned, an age-old concept. It's not new to anyone, I'm sure, but still holds true. And I love the analogy of the iceberg because it is so relevant to many different things in life, but very relevant to safety and cost of risk. So the tip of the iceberg always represents those direct costs and things that we know. They're easy to see. When something happens, we have our insurance costs, we have wage and productivity losses. We have maybe some administrative expenses, medical expenses, but it's what's beneath the surface that has a much bigger impact and a much higher cost to the business. So that's things like, time lost for work stoppage, damage to tools, equipment, things that we need to replace, administrative time spent by supervisors and other safety personnel, replacement worker training costs. So if somebody's injured, either they're out on lost time or restricted duty, we still have to replace that individual to keep production moving. So what does that cost to get that individual up to speed? Lost team productivity, damage to reputation, which is the tip of the iceberg there at the bottom, but could have a major potential impact on the total cost and financial impact to the business, depending on the case. So there's also, if you're not familiar with, OSHA has come up with a safety pays calculator, which I think is very helpful. It really helps kind of bring to light what a total cost in terms of that reputation impact or profitability an accident could have on your business. And they use this calculator here and demonstrate that for your direct costs, your indirect cost ratio, kind of a breakdown here by direct costs can be 4 to 5 times your direct costs, and it kind of goes down the line. So even your smaller incidents can have a greater impact on the business. Maybe there's deductible is lower for those smaller incidents, but they still require all the time and effort, and that below the surface sort of iceberg impact is still there. So TCOR is definitely important. We cannot have this conversation without talking about those risk costs. And I know Darren's got a good example, as he always does for us, of kind of looking beneath the surface and kind of bring this to have an analogy here related to New York City.
Yeah, this is showing the dad in me, where I get a chance to show off some pictures taken on a recent trip. But I am a big, I'm a big believer in and fan of that iceberg analogy. As Jade described, it's the issues that are above surface that we can clearly see, but what's subsurface? What's the attitudes and the actions and the conditions? And they say 30,000 unsafe acts eventually lead themselves up to a potential fatality. And so if we're really going to make a difference about what does above the surface look like for us, we have to attack and make the base, the bottom, the subsurface. That's the lifeblood. So New York City, walking around, wife and I got a chance to go out there before Christmas, and you're walking the streets and it's 7 degrees outside and there's steam coming out of manholes and every which way. And so that just gets me thinking about just the stats of what's going on underneath the surface. 9,000 manhole covers, which I thought was pretty crazy, and 722 miles of subway tracks, and you get nearly 4.5 million people going through that on an annual basis. But really the stat that really jumped out was the 98,000 miles of utility cables. So, really the definition of utility that I use is just beneficial, purposeful. When you look at the New York skyline, you kind of take for granted what powers that. It's what's going on beneath the surface. One gas leak is going to shut down neighborhoods or entire city blocks, taking all of the visual away. And it's the pulse, the what's going on underneath the surface. We also had a chance to go through the World Trade Center memorial, and you kind of get down in the actual bowels, the original footprint of where those buildings were located. And you see the image off to the right here of just these anchor sets along a large concrete wall. Well, on the other side of that is the Hudson River. And so we are, several stories down. Fortunately, that held on that day, and water didn't rush into everything underneath. That 722 miles of subway tracks could have been flooded by the Hudson River, but that strength, that mitigation plan strategy, you know, that is unseen when you're looking at the skyline, but just knowing that that's creating the strength for what's above. Again, no different than the iceberg. Just thought it was an interesting kind of dynamic between the two that wanted to share today.
Yeah, thanks for that example, Darren. I mean, as you're speaking, we don't have a slide on this, but you know, just focusing on what's beneath the surface and the foundation, you know, you could also correlate this to the safety pyramid. I mean, also an age-old concept, but by focusing on what's at the bottom of the pyramid, which are those unsafe acts, unsafe conditions, near misses, it's in turn going to help us in our prevention efforts with those more serious accidents, which lead to, you know, how we evaluate TCOR. And, you know, now we're going to talk about claims costs. So this is more, you know, our direct costs, the tip of the iceberg above the surface, but important to recognize, you know, some stats and trends and further calculate what those direct costs may cost your business. So there's a lot of data out there. But, you know, the National Council on Compensation Insurance is a good one to take a look at. And what they report, and they update this on an annual basis. But the recent report, which shows calculation of workers' compensation costs by cause, and they break this down also by body part and injury nature. But just on average, the average cost per claims combined in for, you know, all types 2019 to 2020 was $41,353, with the most costly insurance claim resulting from motor vehicle crashes at $85,000 per claim filed. So, you know, that's just one of the expenses in our total cost of risk is between medical and indemnity costs, what that just claim, that workers' compensation claim is going to cost us. So if you have, you know, employees that are driving around in company vehicles, that's something that could definitely be an exposure for you. Some of the other causes, you know, pretty high up on the list, with burns at $54,173, falls or slips, 48,000, plot by. So some big numbers there. It's important to take a look at, but take that a little bit further, just to look at some examples. I had mentioned before the tool that OSHA has with the Safety Pays calculator, which I find interesting, but just to kind of help evaluate TCOR and whether you're putting together a business case to your CFO to help communicate ROI, and you need to talk about cost avoidance as you're putting together your ROI case. So just to put together some examples, using this calculator, and there's a link to it at the bottom, but just the calculator estimates the impact on a company's profitability as a result of having these types of incidents occur. So on the site, you can select, okay, let's say that we have an employee that has a fracture, and it breaks down and it uses the NCCI data, and also estimates an average profitability of 3%, which you can make adjustments to. But the estimated direct cost for fractures is $54,856. But then it estimates, based on that ratio chart that OSHA has, you know, what your indirect costs would be in our combined total. But in order to make up for that cost for the business, and, you know, how it would impact profitability for a fracture, we would have to make up $3.8 million in sales to cover the total cost of this incident. That's a big number. That's a lot of additional, you know, widgets or jobs or you know, whatever our business is to bring in revenue just to cover this one incident. Multiply that by however many fractures. We can also look at it by sprains, strains. One of the top you know, injury natures that occurs. You know, even still, you know, big number of direct costs, indirect costs, and, you know, we'd need to make up $2.1 million in sales to cover the total for this loss to the business. So again, that's really kind of showing that bottom of the iceberg here, that our lost production, lost business, that's really the result of strains and sprains and cost avoidance. If we could prevent one strain, one sprain, one fracture, what is the revenue impact to the business? Next, I want to talk about insurance premiums. So another kind of, beneath the surface expense. And we can't talk about insurance premiums without talking about our experience modification factor, which is that multiplier that's used to calculate your insurance premiums for your workers' compensation. And we all know the EMOD takes into account 3 years of loss history, not counting this current policy year, and that's calculated based off of our class code rating and how you compare to others in your industry, and that will affect your insurance premiums. So, if you have more insurance claims and a higher frequency and a higher severity than others in your industry, that is going to affect your insurance premiums for at least 3 years. So just like, same way, if you have a car accident for speeding tickets, you're going to pay more in car insurance than if you have a clean driving record. The same is true with, commercial insurance and workers' compensation. So safety does pay. Safety can help lower costs to the business, from cost avoidance to keeping insurance premiums down. Another important factor to incorporate as we talk about, the cost of doing nothing, and convincing the business that that this is an area that we should invest. And lastly, reputation. So this, area in terms of cost has probably the biggest impact, or the potential to have the biggest impact on cost to the business. It can put your business reputation at risk by just putting off, or, as Darren mentioned, kind of this, well, it is what it is, or kind of shrug of the shoulder attitude towards your safety programs. I mean, just consider how an accidental release of chemicals at a refinery could hurt your public image, or how a product safety recall on a manufacturer plant could harm your brand. Or, Darren's analogy of the elevator, if Otis hadn't focused on the safety brake, how that would change our world, and we wouldn't have skyscrapers because he prioritized safety. It really has had a big impact on our everyday life. So, I like this quote at the bottom: how you do anything is how you do everything. So it's kind of this concept that, or this mindset, and if your attitude about the product or service you're delivering is good enough, or no one will notice, or it's not going to happen to me, then you signal to others, even subconsciously, that you don't really respect your own work. You don't, it's not really the quality is not important to you. And that is true for our safety processes and programs that we've put into place as well, that we don't maybe care as much about our team and the the effort that they do, and the protecting our workforce and our community, and those that we impact by the products that we deliver. So with that, when we talked about those costs, now we want to get into ROI a little bit, and how we demonstrate that. And I think Darren's going to kick us off with a little kind of background about how ROI affects the rest of our life.
Thanks, Jade. Yeah, how you do anything is how you'll do everything. Like, I think many times we think of like these segments of life, that I'm at work, I'm at home, I'm at school, I'm doing something with the kids, like that truly, it really is kind of, I think we all recognize the fact that there's return on investment with our time, with our resources, which how we're doing things, and work for sure, right? Like in workplace safety and what we're doing in that front. But really I think we can all relate to the personal return on investment in several facets, just personally with our health and fitness. We know as we put into that, we can improve, the health and the fitness, and reduce disease and all of those things. Family and kids, education, community, how we serve others, our career. I love the quote here, Vince Lombardi: "The only place success comes before work is in the dictionary." And it takes effort. It takes let's get this thing moving forward. It's one step at a time. And as you go, you just gain muscle to whatever it is that you have going on. So just framing even ROI from a standpoint of this personal, which we all could probably relate to, no different than some of the other facets as we're going to talk about with work and workplace safety. So Jade, I'll pitch it back to you.
Yeah. So, with the ROI conversation, there's a lot of research out there, but you can always lean back to some sources in the industry. OSHA, National Safety Council, they have a lot to say about why safety is good business, and done a lot of studies related to what the return is on average. We talk with our customers all the time about the returns they're seeing and the reductions in insurance premiums and incident severity and frequency. But just on average, OSHA demonstrates or communicates that businesses on average see a return of $4 to $6 for every dollar invested in their workplace safety programs. And by comparison, the National Safety Council has done studies showing that $1 invested in injury prevention returns between $2 and $6. So two different sources really demonstrating the same thing, that there is significant return to be gained by this investment. It is good business. It shouldn't be seen as a cost center, but really an investment in the company's future. KBA has done some surveys. We did a survey last year across many different industries, oil and gas, construction, manufacturing. We surveyed, I think, 400 to 500 organizations, and those that participated in our survey were individuals that are responsible for their company's EHS program. They're most likely operational owners, companies, they're involved in the day-to-day safety program operations. And the majority of these respondents have a team of 2 to 4 members of their safety team. Company size ranged from 50 employees to 2,000 employees. And we really wanted to see, what they say. And these are not just KBA customers. This is just kind of, market individuals. We wanted to see the differences in EHS or safety program performance of those that use a tool like EHS software and those that don't. And we kind of asked these questions from a process management standpoint and also a people-focused standpoint, and compared the evaluation of those users. So what was interesting about this, the respondents claiming good or excellent ratings were much higher, no surprise there, in EHS software users in all categories, from incident reporting and tracking to data collection analysis. Data collection analysis was perhaps the most interesting metric. So when comparing the software users who reported good or excellent performance in this category, 55% versus 35% of non-software users reporting good or excellent. So those that use EHS software, they're able to get data. They're able to, instead of spending time in the manual processes, they can do something different with their time. They have the data in front of them. They can see the results of what's happening. They can see what those at-risk behaviors, at-risk conditions, or where we're kind of bleeding within the organization that we need to focus more time and attention. So it tells me the data collection is a significant issue. Separately, we looked at engagement. So while employment engagement is pretty good overall, engagement is much higher with the EHS software users. That they report above average employee engagement, 51%, compared to only 37% who don't use EHS software. And then secondly to this, just EHS program capabilities. How do they kind of evaluate their overall program? Which statement best describes your program? We fully cover all of our risk and compliance issues. We have a strong program, but room for improvement. We have capabilities, but we're not where we should be, or we are able to respond to critical issues, but can't anticipate, plan, or scale. So here was just kind of staggering results. 76% of EHS software users indicated their programmer is strong or complete. Everyone, responded that they still room for improvement. There always is, but it was interesting to see that the difference here with those software users have a lot more confidence in their program, in their ability to recognize issues in response, and really just the proactiveness of what they have in place. Sorry, having issues with my mouse here. All right, so just to give some customer examples, so we constantly want to hear our customer stories and, how are they recognizing ROI? We offer them EHS software solutions, and our customers have access to a portal where they can kind of discuss these things amongst themselves. They talk with others about how to gain buy-in from, their CFO or executives, and convince them to invest in the program. Every customer always speaks to time savings and time leading to costs, and but also cost avoidance. One customer, worked with their procurement department and recognized over $500,000 in savings just from cost avoidance because they're able to capture that data, visualize it, identify issues before something happens. So it really is that proactive management, and you never know what you prevented because it never occurred. Sometimes that's hard to put on paper in an ROI case, but it is important to demonstrate in a real story. So with that, I'll pass it back over to Darren to kind of wrap us up with a summary of our conversation today.
Yeah, thanks, Jade. Just a few more slides here, and then we'll land the plane, and glad to take any questions. But kind of in summary, what's the cost of doing nothing? It's not nothing, right? I mean, it's proven time and again that it's very expensive. And as Jade laid out, some of the costs associated with unwanted events and accidents and injuries, it's costly. It costs the success of the business, reputation. We always had the mentality of we're doing work today to earn our next job. So you're kind of always in audition mode. The minute you don't do anything and things fall apart, the success of the business will go right with it. Unwanted events negatively affect employees and assets. That is going to be a cost. Kind of the hope and prayer, mentality. That plan is short term and dangerous. Just hoping for the best. I have hope and I got faith, but I'm gonna plan accordingly to kind of mitigate any issues that are potentially in front of us. And then really the cost is quality leadership. No decision is a decision. And as mentioned before, if someone's not going to step in and lead, that will get filled in by somebody or something. And so let's take control of the narrative there as leaders and step in and make decisions. Just a couple really quick things. This is always something I enjoy sharing and talking about and really reminding myself of. But in 1983, an author by the name of Lauren Whitehead, and this was in the American Journal of Physics, kind of discovered that if we all have probably done dominoes where you can line them up and push them down and watch them go. But they not only can they topple each other, but they can topple bigger things. And kind of the study showed that a domino can knock over another domino 1.5 times its size. So if we start with a 2-inch domino, it has the capacity to knock over a 3-inch domino. 3-inch can knock over a 4.5-inch domino, and so on. What's fun to think about is this compounding growth of that. And as you get to the 18th domino, so to speak, it's the size of the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and the 23rd is the size of the Eiffel Tower, and the 29th is the size of the Empire State Building. And so just it's this starting small has this positive ripple effect to do bigger and better things. It reminds me a little bit of, if you've seen Admiral William McRaven, he did the commencement address for University of Texas several years ago. And he kind of related this a little bit to Navy SEALs, which are like one of the more impressive soldier types that we have, the training they go through and all of that. But one of the starting points is they learn to make their bed, and they learn to make their bed with like just immaculate precision. Well, that leads into, large things that they're able to accomplish on very dangerous missions. But it starts with a 2-inch domino, and they're able to kind of grow it from that point. So, we exercise one workout at a time. We read a book, one chapter at a time. We diet one meal at a time. So it's just this idea of starting small and having deposits of effort, kind of built in over time. We grow that. So really kind of taking that into what opportunities do we have to do something? As I kind of had mentioned, and maybe even going to the next slide here, even just kind of mentioning we're all on a journey, right? Like nobody fully arrives. There's a safety department is intact because there's going to be a need for that tomorrow. There's always weaknesses that we can strengthen. There's always opportunities for us to be better. And so I think this really goes for everybody, not that we're doing nothing, but where in that are we that we can do something? This is relating back to the example of some of what is doing nothing look like. What are some of those? These are just the counterparts to that. Training in a way that is, I have a recipe to the job, and I have a step-by-step process of what good looks like to do this, and then addressing hazards along the way to ensure that we're keeping people and equipment safe, that we're honoring the environment, that we're being diligent and efficient for the job owner, whatever the scenario is. Establishing and having visible leadership. One mentor that I have, one of the greatest leadership things that have resonated with me over the years is pick up trash. The highest level person isn't beneath doing the most meaningless job. Like it's all impactful in what we do, and leading by example is huge. Huddling up, planning for the work proactively, learning from lagging indicators, but also more importantly, leading indicators. That's the acts and behaviors that we see. Open channel of communication, providing positive feedback. That's a never ending effort to keep that as open as possible and as effective as possible. And so really just in summary, just those are just some, but we all have those things that, what is that 2-inch domino? What I find interesting here is you really can't get to the 10th domino for the most part and knock that down unless you've knocked down the first 9, and the 9th is going to help you knock down the 10th. So hopefully that's a little bit of an encouragement, just to kind of wrap us up here as we lead into questions, but just an encouragement that, getting started, doing something, let's kind of move this thing forward in an effort to continuously improve. So glad to wrap this up and move on to the question portion.
Well, thank you so much to you both for this fantastic presentation. And before we start the Q&A, we want to remind everyone of the evaluation survey we're asking you to complete. The survey will open in a different screen after this webinar, and your input is important because it'll help us improve our future webcast. I guess to get to the first question, is there a formula to determine cost to cover injuries in terms of sales?
Yeah, so and we'll provide the slides, and I'm sure they'll be sent out, but there's links in the slides to, OSHA's come up with a pretty good, easy to use calculator that's called the Safety Pays calculator. And you can select the, injury type and come up with different scenarios and options, but based on their ratio of, direct cost to indirect cost, it will come up with a profitability assessment of sales to cover individual type incidents. And if you want to, maybe compare it to the previous year's loss reports, you can put in how many incidents you had, the severity of them, and just come up with those profitability calculations to use in your ROI assessment and maybe a business case to present to a CFO to get a budget for investment.
I did forget to add as a reminder for our attendees, you'd like to ask a question, feel free to click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And again, if we don't get to your question, all unanswered questions will be forwarded along to our speakers. So just got another question. What would be an example of tying in safety initiative to company corporate goals?
Alan, if you don't mind, repeat that. We'll make sure I'm
Oh, so, no,
understanding
sure,
the
that's
question.
okay. What would be an example of tying in safety initiatives to company corporate goals?
Tying in safety initiatives to company corporate goals. Goodness, that could mean so many different things. I mean, I'll take a stab at it. You know, I think a lot we look at trends, kind of where have we been and where do we want to go? And there's going to be some goal oriented focus on that. And how do we measure our progress? And then how do we, you know, you want to measure it to be able to manage it and to affect either change and or show your constant improvement towards that. So I think so many you know, safety related initiatives, they dovetail very well and very close with the overall organizational goals. You know, the striving for revenue dollars, the reduction in lost you know, sunken costs, you know, keeping assets up and running. You know, there's financial elements from a business perspective that, you know, safety becomes it's a description. You know, I mean, there's a lot more to it. I'm not trying to simplify it, but it's we're safe, we're punctual. You know, it's like it's a characteristic trait of the business, as we talked about reputation a little bit and earning your next job. I think the right safety initiative, and that means a lot for different people, because as mentioned, we all kind of have our weak muscle that we need to get into the gym and work out a little bit more. But how do we align that to impact? I mean, there's direct tied impact to, you know, business goals, business impact from a safety standpoint. So I'm probably not being too specific there, but I think there's a lot that could really answer that question.
I actually had a question of my own. Any advice on getting an audience with the C-suite executives to kind of get their ear or make the business case for safety?
Yeah, you know, the path that we have, that we talk with a lot of safety managers, safety directors, C-level, you know, individuals that oversee that department. I think they know the struggles and the pinch points that are experienced. What I always come with is really, what are those? Like, if we could reduce your time doing X and give you that time back, what is X? Operationally speaking, when we deploy out a new feature, ultimately the goal is to become more compliant and more efficient, but take less time. And so I think if you can understand where are the pinch points, the hangups, the problem areas that are experienced across the organization, I would like to think that a C-level all the way up to the president, CEO, would understand and relate to that. And a lot of times it's sometimes not safety specific, but safety can, just like with the elevator analogy, like there's some things we can do to speed up the process to ultimately get the job done on time, get done ahead of schedule, require less work hours, put less miles on our vehicles, like all of those kind of things. So I think it's a matter, for me, it's a matter of if coming to the table, not only with the here's the safety programming, but like really trying to understand where their struggles are. Because I think organizations are no different than people. They kind of have their own personalities within their own walls, that it's just really good to understand what those are.
Well, thank you so much to you both for this awesome presentation. We'd like to thank Jade Brainerd, Darren Boyd, the entire team from our sponsor KPA, and of course, all of our listeners. Thank you and have a safe day.